Confused about how to plan for your retirement? Shawn Maloney is here to help. Shawn has created the Retire Happy framework that considers more than just how much you should save. Getting information and tools to preserve your financial future is minutes away. Welcome to the Priority of Retirement with your host, Shawn Maloney.
Welcome to another episode of the Priority of Retirement, where we delve into all the aspects of retirement planning for a happy retirement. I'm your host, Shawn Maloney. Welcome to the episode. Today, we're honored to have Stephen Kates on the phone with us. Or I shouldn't say on the phone, they're on the line, they're on Zoom here, aren't we? Certified financial planner with over 15 years experience in helping individuals and families grow and protect their wealth. Stephen is a principal financial analyst for Annuity.org and RetireGuide.com, where he dives into the latest trends in wealth management, retirement planning, and investing. His expertise has been featured on major platforms like Fox Business, CBS News, CNET, and Newsweeks. Whether you're just starting your financial journey or looking to refine your strategy, stay tuned. You don't want to miss this conversation. Stephen, welcome as a fellow person in the financial services industry and serving our community for retirees. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, most definitely. We have a lot of things in common, and we both love educating people in the proper way for wealth management and retirement. So always great to talk to a fellow advisor out there.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. So we're just going to kick it off. We'll go through a few little things. What do you consider some of the most critical items when creating a personalized wealth management plan? I mean, our listeners have heard us talk about it a lot. Love to get your perspective.
Yeah, I think that depending on who you are, certain things are going to bubble up to the top. I think that's certainly what the financial planning conversations you have with an advisor, become about. But, I think in a vacuum, two things to me, risk management, I think is really, really important. And I think that can be your investment strategy. I think it can be the way that you approach, income planning, or just handling your finances in general. I think certainly with the market performance recently, risk management is maybe a little bit more on everybody's minds. And I think it should be on everybody's minds as much or more than it is, today. And then I think the second thing is really around legacy planning. I'm very fond of saying that, it's a good idea to start with the end in mind. If you know where you want to be, what you want things to look like, how organized things should be, you can put your plan together to make that happen. If you only think of that as the afterthought, then, you kind of start behind the eight ball.
1,000%. And I love you mentioned the word risk management, because a lot of people don't think of that, right? We're all in this element of grow. But when we're starting to, think about, hey, we need to make this stuff last a little bit, you start getting in the business of risk management and protecting yourself as well, right?
And I think a lot of people, certainly in the last few years, there are retirees out there, some people, well before retirees, but, they might have seen their $500,000 portfolio, in 2020 drop to 400 or 350.
Yeah.
And then now it's 900. And they have just had this whipsaw, but they get anchored to those big numbers,
Right.
which is just natural. You see it go from 800 to 850 to 900, over the last few years as the market has just been going gangbusters.
Yeah.
And that's great. You see a pullback and it's this visceral hurt, even though, you might have been, only back to a position you were a few months ago.
Sure. It's an emotional roller coaster, that's for sure. And
it's very much an emotional roller coaster.
Yeah. And it's, especially when it's your own money, right? You're going to that emotional jerk reaction. We always encourage people, hey, yes, it can seem devastating, but take a pause before you make any decisions and seek advice, obviously. But those emotional decisions on the knee jerk are often, can be devastating in themselves, right?
I think it can be, and the emotion of watching your money grow or contract, I think is much worse for people when it's their own money. That's why you talk to an advisor, to try to have that sort of unbiased third party. But I think for people on their own, the more that they can sort of remove themselves from the moment, pull back, zoom out, and kind of try to take a little bit of perspective on what is really going on. What do we know and what do we not know?
Yeah.
To,
100%.
I think one of the things to me that helps doing that is zooming out on the market, and not just looking at, oh my gosh, Monday, what happened? Tuesday, what happened? But okay, well, this Monday has been preceded by what, and is likely to be followed by what? I think, even we're, a little bit more than, 10 days out from sort of that drop last Monday. And we're back up 6.5%.
Yeah.
Since Monday. And we're still up year to date, almost 17%. That's the reality that we're in. So yes, we saw the market slide over the preceding week prior to Monday the 5th when we had that big drop. Yep. But we're still very, very healthy returns, high, well above. And I think that's what people need to focus on is we are going to have those drops, but it's within still a very, very healthy, very, very positive market environment. You're better off. Most people are better off than they were in January, investment wise, if they've been participating. And I think that's really what the focus needs to be.
Yeah, no, great advice, because you need to look at the overall big picture, and the whole scale of things, and not just a micro movement that happened in a certain point in time. You got to look for those trends, not just the one event, for sure. Well, so it's a good segue. Right? Speaking of that, I mean, people, that's been top of mind for a lot of people here over the last week or so. They felt that, they saw it. There's always a lot of jargon and stuff out in the news and pundits saying X, Y, Z. Well, we're going to a recession, or you hear all kinds of things, and we all know that the markets react to news events more so today, than they really ever have, right? But with that in mind, with our current economic conditions, we still are in this bull run. We're still in a good market, but there is some choppiness. There may be some choppiness ahead. What would you suggest from an adjustments, or if any, in people's strategies in response to where we're at today in the economy and the market?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think that what people should do, I think, depends on a couple factors. One, how old you are, how long until you have sort of this money for use. And if we're thinking about retirement, people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, you really should not be doing anything different.
Right. You
should be buying. Maybe you want to be buying stocks if you're feeling aggressive enough and want to continue to do that. Yep. Those dips are a good opportunity to sort of pick up more if you have cash to employ. And I think most people do. Yep. If you are still not feeling aggressive, if you're feeling, this is really knocking me off, bonds are actually still a pretty good position. They're probably positioned as best as they could be in the last few years.
Right.
And I think for people who are close to retirement or in retirement, you probably need to think about, again, a little bit of risk management. If it was a punch in the gut, through the first week of August, you're probably over your skis on risk. You've probably been enjoying a little bit too much stock exposure, Mag 7, what have you, cryptocurrencies, whatever you want to have. And it might be time to, okay, let's pull in the reins a little bit. Let's think about how do we position ourselves for a little bit of protection and flexibility, and the growth can take care of itself. You've had a lot of growth. You may be able to take a little bit off the table and do okay. And I think for outside of just market volatility, interest rates, now I haven't talked to Jerome, but interest rates are coming down. I think everybody knows it. It's just a matter of when. I believe it's probably going to be September, but interest rates are going to come down. And therefore, a lot of people need to put their cash to work. They've been enjoying high rates on money markets and high yield savings accounts. It's not going to last forever. So if you haven't made a plan for what you're going to do with that cash, you need to do that.
No, it's a very valid point, because I know a lot of people have rushed, and rightly so, to some of the good high yield savings accounts and things that are out there. And why not take advantage of those kind of rates when they're available? A lot of people have cash sitting on the sidelines in emergency funds or savings that we're getting next to nothing. So that's a great point of being aware of where you're at and what's upcoming, and not just being sitting back on your heels just because you're in that high yield savings now. Keep an eye on what the interest rates are doing and make adjustments, when those things start moving. Sometimes,
Yeah, I think the news cycle, which has pros and cons to follow too closely, but to know that that is likely happening, that the back half of this year will
right.
probably see at least one rate cut. In 2025, we're probably going to see more. And so you need to think about, okay, what actions should I be taking?
Sure.
Could I reposition into, a longer term CD, a fixed deferred annuity, something that may
Right.
lock in my rate if you
Yep.
still want to have conservative money or money
Yep.
in a conservative
Yep.
option. So it's really just about sort of thinking a little bit ahead of where you're going to be. And I think everybody's in that position. I certainly am carrying more cash today because I can get a healthy rate on it than I was a few years ago.
Yeah.
Because if I can get a risk-free 5%, why would I not do that? Um, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I've
It gives
got I've
you.
got two young kids and some home renovations. Uh, it doesn't hurt to have a little bit of cash on hand when you can.
No, life happens.
Yeah.
That's for sure. No, that's fantastic. Well, we talk a lot about how retirement today is different than it used to be for our parents or grandparents. It used to be
Mhm.
back in the day. You everybody had a pension, you had Social Security, and there wasn't much planning involved, really. And now that we've moved more toward, of course, the defined contribution plans, which are the 401ks and those kind of things, it really puts the onus back on, the consumer or us as, to handle our own retirement. It's just not necessarily a one and done. And then you combine that with, well, only about 7% of companies offer new employees pensions these days. So pensions are kind of gone by the wayside, right? So how do we replace that? How do we compensate for that? And what I want to ask you is, especially when it's your role and what you do,
Mhm.
what do you see as the role of how annuities play in the retirement portfolio? Where are they most appropriate?
So annuities can play a variety of roles, which is interesting, and it depends on the position that you're in. For retirees, the primary thing that you might look to annuities for is going to be income and
Yep.
protection. And I think most people are familiar enough with the income annuity side, which is essentially a pension.
Yep.
You're handing over a chunk of change to an insurance company, and they are going to then promise you back lifetime income or income
Yep.
for a certain period of time. And that is very valuable. I very strongly believe that all essential expenses, you can define that however you want, but generally, essential are the things that keep you alive, maybe plus the things that you just can't live without.
Yep.
But those should be covered by guaranteed income.
Great.
And for some people, that's Social Security or Social Security plus pensions if they have it.
Yep.
But for a lot of people, Social Security isn't enough. And certainly high income earners, Social Security is definitely not enough because it might only replace 20 or 30% of their retirement income or what they
Right.
need for retirement income. In which case, if you don't want certain expenses to potentially be at risk via market drop or other things, or you just don't want to be stressed about it, guaranteed income is there to do that. And that can play a role in the retirement strategy so that your growth can really just fly. You can have more permission to spend and actually just not worry about it, which I
Yep.
think is really important. That's what those are there for. Um, I think that the mindset change for people in retirement is tough to go from accumulation and building up a nest egg
100%.
to sort of make that mental switch to say, okay,
Yeah.
this is now income.
Yeah.
And what do I do to most effectively create income? If you can draw it off a portfolio and that's what you want, great. But efficient income, an annuity can do that. And I think for a lot of people, that's something that they should look more closely at. And I think certain populations are doing that because annuity sales are just going off the charts.
Yeah, no, they're great protections, and you hit one thing on the head as well, as far as people being in that mindset of accumulation and
Mhm.
not thinking about the distribution side. And all too often, that's all people are concentrated on is accumulation side, which you need to be for a period of time. Obviously, you need to build that nest
Yeah.
egg up, but you got to have a solid plan in place to make sure that what you're really doing is income planning, right? You're recreating your paycheck, and how are you going to make that last? How is your nest egg going to perform to make that last? And we always like to call that, that's got, you talk about the core and the need. We call that the happy factor, right? I mean, that's the peace of mind piece. If I know I can pay my bills every month,
Yeah.
that's great. That's the need factor. Then you move on to the wants and the wishes and how you're going to fund that. But hey, let's tackle that needs category first, right? And get that security in place for you. Um,
Yeah, that's a foundation of what your retirement is covering those things. You don't want to worry about the market taking away your ability to cover a mortgage or a property tax bill. You want that to be secure and safe. And you can have a portion of your portfolio that's in growth. You should. No one should ever have all their money in an annuity.
100%.
Never. But you should also probably not have all your money in a market-based, volatile portfolio. Right. You need a little bit of both. And if Social Security doesn't cover the essentials, that's kind of the line that for me, I really draw in the sand to say that this is how much you should have. And an annuity can play that role.
Yeah, 100%. And just like the way I relate it to people is like, when you're building your portfolio up, you're not going to invest everything into one stock and put all your kits in one bucket, right? Well, think about it the same way, folks, is that if you're on your retirement plan, your sources of income, your types of accounts should be diversified as well. All those different type of accounts, whether they're in brokerage accounts for equities or annuities or Social Security or bonds or whatever it may be, they all serve a different purpose of protecting against different risks. So that's a very valid point. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, and there's accumulation and sort of deferral can be a value even in retirement. Primarily you're thinking about that in the accumulation phase as you're building up your nest egg towards retirement. But for certain people that are high income or maybe expecting that they're going to have required distributions at now past 70, but they're going to have those to an effect that's more than they need. There are strategies that you can use that can further defer some of your retirement income. So a QLAC, or a qualified longevity annuity contract, allows you to delay required distributions. So you can take up to $200,000 for your life and put it in an annuity that might start years later, as late as age 85. And you don't then have to take required distributions from that money. So for people who are trying to trying to sort of push off, or they're hustling to like move over money from a traditional to a Roth because they don't want to get slammed, you have another option. You have other things that can be utilized to try to move the pieces around the board. So there are strategic pieces that annuities can play in that role. I think that's a very detailed conversation that might not be, I don't want to really bury your audience in all the specifics, but
no, exactly.
Some of the strategic value of those things, and you can go in the same direction on longevity planning or even legacy planning.
Yeah, no doubt, and that's definitely a deeper conversation, and it's not a one size fits all for everybody. Everybody kind of deserves a personalized plan, and one person's situation may be different than another.
And that's
person.
really what you need. Yeah. I would never encourage anybody, whether you're looking at Medicare qualified annuities or QLACs or anything like that, to go alone. It's too complicated. Right. The government keeps changing the laws, which is really annoying for us, let alone for people who aren't reading this every day. But those are things that you need to talk to an advisor about, and they can walk you through that process to ultimately try to meet those needs. If you have a requirement or a desire to do a certain thing, there are products, there are solutions out there, but you got to go down the right path.
Yeah, there's no need to do it alone. That's a lonely road, a scary road sometimes, right? But there's a lot of information out there. Of course, in this modern day and age, and people are Googling or going on YouTube or whatever it is, there's information aplenty out there of, and different opinions and different things. So what would be your piece of advice, if people are trying to make informed decisions and they're out there just searching and Googling and they're getting this massive information just flowing in their face? What's your best recommendation for making informed decisions about their future?
I'm gonna try not to get on a soapbox here, so just pull me down if I do. I think that the internet is a tremendous asset, but it's also a tremendous liability. And one of the things that, and I think that as I have progressed in my career, I've done more around, sort of sunk more into financial literacy. Obviously there's financial planning, but I think even the basics of financial literacy come into play in a huge, huge way. If for nothing else, then helping people understand bad information online or TikTok or Instagram or wherever you're getting that, but understanding what's bad information, what's a scam, what's just dead wrong, and having some level of financial literacy, coming out of high school or college is going to allow younger people to not go down some road, get scammed, do something silly. That was rampant through the pandemic of people just talking about how they're making millions of dollars and, all of this. I think people should know enough to know that doesn't smell right. And that's, I think, the goal that I would have when I talk to people about financial literacy is that they have that baseline knowledge to realize, hey, if somebody tells me that they're making, a consistent 2% every day on some, Forex trading strategy on Instagram, like that's BS.
Right.
That's just not real.
Yeah.
And those kind of things, I think, avoid the mistakes or help people avoid the mistakes so that they can actually go down the right road.
Agreed.
I think,
yeah,
go ahead.
It's scary because in today's world, it used to be back when we were growing up, the high school and college, you used to get some financial education, right? As far as even just the basic financial 101 stuff, maybe not necessarily down the road into investing and planning for retirement, but now even some of the core regular financial 101 stuff is missing in the education system today. So I agree with you. I mean, and as people in the industry, we're always trying to educate people on the proper things, instead of just jumping off into decisions without informed decisions. There's just a big void of the proper information out there. Yeah,
there is. I think that there's a company, it's a nonprofit, that I really like, and they have a lot of content online that's meant for teachers. It's meant for people who are going to be teaching financial literacy courses to students, middle school, high school, called Next Gen Personal Finance. And I think that is an absolutely amazing, amazing organization. And their curriculum and their tools, they've got little financial games, and it's the basics. It's meant for middle school, it's meant for high school, but that is absolutely stellar information that anybody could really get some good information from on, how does a credit card work? How does the credit system work? How does compound interest work? Some of those very, very basic concepts, but they explain it in a really easy way. And I think for parents who want to help their own kids sort of grow in that area, that's a great resource. I would encourage everybody to check that out. Some of their games are actually really fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. Love that. Love it. Love that. So, people get a little scared when they talk about thinking of their financial future and all the complexities, and there's a lot of challenges that get thrown up in their face, or when they just think about, retirement in general and some of the fears that are out there. With that in mind, what do you see as the biggest challenges, in retirement planning, and what are the best routes for people to overcome that?
So I'm sure that you have heard or felt this as you've done your own planning with clients, but I think helping people figure out when is enough. What is that number? I think that especially as the market grows, and even recently, as we were talking about, seeing investment portfolios really balloon, you anchor to this new number, and it always feels like, okay, it's over the next hill. Then I'm done. Then I'm good. And I think that helping people figure out how to settle on something and commit to it so that they can go live their life. I think that there are people out there who could retire earlier, could retire better than they do, because they're always thinking about more or wanting to do more or comparing themselves to somebody else. So that is an emotional thing. That is a human thing to look at your neighbor and say, what are they doing that I'm not doing? Maybe I need to work that extra year, or maybe I need to spend that little bit less. And I think an advisor's job is to try to guide people through some of those really challenging emotional issues. So the number one thing is, how do you help somebody figure out what is enough? so that they can go and actually live their life and do the fun things that they want to do. I think the other side of it is, people who are behind, their 40s, 50s, 60s, and they realize,
Mhm.
I'm not going to be able to retire. What can you do? How do you get there? And
Right.
sometimes that's a matter of kind of coming in with some strategies that get them across the finish line that might not be perfect, but helping people get there. Whether it's paying down debt, a better saving strategy,
Right.
diligent commitment to hitting certain goals, reducing spending, et cetera.
Yeah.
But having maybe a little bit of a heavier hand to say, okay, it's time to buckle down. And that's, I think the harder job from an advisor.
Sure.
That was always a harder job for me. It's
Yeah.
fun to be aspirational,
Yeah.
and help people sort of, do better, do more,
Yeah.
do something creative. But when you've got to be, okay, hey, let's look at your spending and let's cut it back. That's
Yeah.
no fun, but
No,
it
that's
is
no
very,
fun. But I think everybody needs a plan, deserves a plan, right? It doesn't matter where you're at. It doesn't matter if you're starting off in the journey of planning, or you're getting closer to retirement. To your point, you need to know what your goal is. How are you going to reach the goal and get to that point if you don't even know what it is? And then let's digest it, right? If we can break it down into smaller chunks. You tackle that needs category first, and then you move on to the wants and the wishes, and you can digest it, in smaller chunks. But I think, a lot of people plan more for a vacation than they do for their retirement, right?
yeah.
You know,
I think retirement's this nebulous concept, and I worked quite a bit in the last few years in a prior job with a lot of younger people,
yeah,
higher earning professionals that were in their 30s primarily, a lot of stock equity compensation, things like that. So, these are people that are set up well financially,
sure,
but we talk about retirement, we talk about goals, and some of them would have none. They were like, I don't know, what goals should I have?
yeah,
you know, I don't know what retirement looks like for me. They're so deep into work or family or other things, they
right,
just cannot even conceive of what that might be like or
yeah,
how it could happen. And so in some ways they would ask me and our team, they would say, what should I do? What should I plan for? Like, what are
yeah,
good goals to have? I'd be like, that's sort of a hard thing to answer, to say, let me tell you what your goals should be. Um, but I think for a lot of younger people, they're kind of locked into this mindset that, it's work, save, invest, become wealthy, but there is no to what end.
right,
And I think that's just something that a lot of people are gonna have to discover, that, their money needs to be for a purpose,
yeah,
uh, and a means to an end, and that they should then enjoy it and use it.
yeah, 100%. Well, man, I've enjoyed the conversation. I want to wrap up with this.
Yeah.
You have some different experiences out there, and now you have some associations that we mentioned earlier. So how has your experience in the media and the media appearances kind of shaped your process and how you educate public about financial matters?
So it's been honestly really eye opening, because I think the world of financial advice, of the one-on-one client relationships, is extremely
Yeah,
different than what it is, sort of out there in the media, in the public. Um, I think, just to use an example of just the most recent sort of few months, we've had a wild kind of news cycle in this country. You know, the election is now more uncertain than it was a month ago. The market is up and down. There's a lot of things going on. And, financial media is primarily entertainment. And I think everybody should understand that. Uh, the things that they talk about the most are not necessarily the things that are actually useful or impactful all the time for people to pay attention to, such
right.
as, and this is something that, a lot of news outlets, they want to talk about the things that people want to read about, but those aren't necessarily helpful financially. Things like, how should you invest if President Trump or becomes president, or Vice President Harris becomes president?
Right.
That is neither here nor there, and almost entirely meaningless to how people should invest, because that is a few months away. and a moment in time. And looking at history, who the president is generally has not had a massive impact on the growth of the economy or the market performance.
Yep.
And so how would you change your investments based on those? That's an almost meaningless question with a kind of nebulous answer. So things like that, the focus of certain financial media on topics that are not helpful to people, that are not necessarily germane to the conditions of how prepared is Gen X for retirement. What are the weak points? I think one of the things that's interesting is that certain generations, certain people who are in their 50s and 60s, Gen X, they were at an inflection point where pensions were on their way out, 401ks were only just beginning, and they did not have an easy access to financial literacy that millennials, which is kind of my generation, had through the internet. And so they are in the worst position of anybody. They began saving earlier than the baby boomers, but they have not actually succeeded in saving enough or effectively managing their investments. So they are behind. They are behind where millennials are. They are behind where Gen Z is. Millennials and Gen Z started saving substantially earlier, nearly a decade earlier for millennials, and Gen Z, in some cases, the average is in college. They're saving for retirement based on data from the Federal Reserve. And those kind of things, I think, are, to me, more interesting, more impactful for people to read about, because then they can think about, okay, how does this apply to me? And what can we be doing about it?
That's perfect, man. I love that you have a passion for educating people. I love what you're doing out there as far as educating people and around wealth management, retirement planning, all that. It's definitely needed in our industry. And I really appreciate you coming on today. And folks, all Stephen's information will be in the show notes. You can find that in the podcast area. Stephen, it's been an honor having you on, and look forward to talking to you in the future, buddy.
Appreciate it. This was great. Thank you so much, Shawn.
All right. Take care, guys.
Thanks for listening to The Priority of Retirement with Shawn Maloney. If you enjoyed the show, check out our reviews on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For more free resources to help with your retirement journey, go to retirewisepro.com or check the link in the show notes. You can also download a free copy of Shawn's book, The Priority of Retirement, or reach out to discuss working with him directly at retirewisepro.com. Thanks for listening.
Insurance products offered through the insurance business RetireWise LLC. RetireWise LLC is also an investment advisory practice that offers products and services through AE Wealth Management LLC, AEWM, a registered investment advisor. AEWM does not offer insurance products. The insurance products offered by RetireWise LLC are not subject to investment advisor requirements. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Any references to protection, safety, or lifetime income generally refer to fixed insurance products, never securities or investments. Insurance guarantees are backed by the financial strength and claims-paying abilities of the insuring carrier. This podcast intended for informational purposes only. It is not intended to be used as the sole basis for financial decisions, nor should it be construed as advice designed to meet the particular needs of an individual situation. RetireWise LLC is not permitted to offer, and no statement made during the show shall constitute tax or legal advice. Our firm is not affiliated with or endorsed by the U.S. government or any governmental agency. The information and opinions contained herein provided by third parties have been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, but accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed by RetireWise LLC. Guests of the Priority of Retirement are not affiliated with, nor do they endorse Shawn Maloney or RetireWise LLC.